So I watched this movie, She Said, which is about the two ladies at the New York Times who, along with the New Yorker, broke the story on Harvey Weinstein. And it's really interesting because it's what I found to be, I thought it was a pretty decent movie, pretty fun movie to watch. And it's a true story based on their books, the reporters' books. But it is what I call a lie by context. And this is a very, very important thing that we have to learn about the culture, lies by context. The way I first kind of started thinking about this was years ago when they were making all the movies about the wars on terror. And this is one of the reasons I became an outspoken conservative, because I felt it was so wrong to make propaganda for the enemy while our soldiers were in the field. Never happened before. The anti-Vietnam War movies, anti-World War I, anti-World War II, all those movies that were made that were anti-war were made after the wars were over and the guys were safely home. These movies were being made showing Americans as bad people, and there were a lot of them, Lions for Lambs and Redacted, Redeemed, whatever, they all had the same name. It was Green Zone, there were just a lot of them. They showed us as the bad guys while our guys were in the field, and I wrote about this repeatedly, and it ended my Hollywood career, as far as I'm concerned. But the reason these were lies by context, there was one instance, a Brian De Palma film called Redacted, and it was about a group of American GIs who raped an Iraqi girl and killed her family. And it was basically De Palma trying to restore his glory days from a film he made about Vietnam called Casualties of War, which was also with Michael J. Fox, also about a rape in Vietnam. And the point of it was we were raping Vietnam by being there. And when people said, this is an unfair way to represent our troops, he said, well, it's based on a true story. And it was. It was based on a true story. But, that's absurd. There are 160,000 coalition troops in Iraq at the height of the fighting. That's, the population of a small city. The fact that one or two or three of them were criminals does not mean that the war was wrong, and does not mean that it's a fair metaphor for the war or for the way those soldiers were behaving. And it wasn't. It was an unfair way of saying it. So it was lie by context. Another movie that's a lie by context, a terrific movie, is All the President's Men, about Woodward and Bernstein going after Nixon. And yes, the Washington Post exposed real dirty tricks by Richard Nixon, but they never exposed very similar dirty tricks by JFK. They hated Nixon because he hunted communists like Alger Hiss, and because they liked Alger Hiss because they were left-wingers, and Nixon was right, and they never forgave him for it. And now we know from the Durham report that they're perfectly happy for a politician to commit dirty tricks with the help of federal agencies, as long as it's a Democrat. So All the President's Men is a good movie, maybe even a great movie. It's a true movie, but it's a total lie. And that's the way it is with this movie, She Said. It's the story of Zoe Cantor and Megan Twohey. It was Ronan Farrow, the name I was looking for. He was also working on the story, and they helped bring the rapist movie producer Harvey Weinstein to justice. Now, let me say, as a non-feminist and an anti-feminist, destroying Harvey Weinstein is like one of my favorite things that's ever happened. I mean, it was, whatever gray areas there may be about transactional sex in Hollywood, Harvey Weinstein was a monster. I'm delighted to see him hung by his thumbs, okay? And as a non-feminist and an anti-feminist, I also think reporters like Cantor and Toohey should be home taking care of their small children. The movie shows them repeatedly being called away from their small children, and I think they morally, they should have not been working at the New York Times and taking care of their children. However, I don't run the world, and I'm not the judge of the world. I have nothing to say about it. I'm glad that while they were immorally and neglecting their children and leaving them they never show you, they pretend they always leave them with their husbands, but that can't be right. I'm sure they were leaving them with minority women who had to leave their children behind to take care of Cantor and Toohey's children. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm sure that was in there. But I'm glad that while they were doing this immoral thing, they were at the New York Times getting Harvey Weinstein. All right. Now, and another thing, as always, in our artistic community, we have so many talented people. Cantor is played by Zoe Kazan from the famous Elia Kazan family. Toohey is played by Carey Mulligan, a terrific actress, and they're both wonderful. Andre Braugher is in it as Dean Baquet. He's fantastic. Jennifer Ehle, one of the greatest British actresses. I just love her. Everybody's just absolutely terrific in it. Writing direction is good. It plays a little bit like Girl Ghostbusters. It plays like Girl, All the President's Men. It's like the same movie, but with girls in it, and it does that. However, the film hagiographizes, makes a saint out of the New York Times. The New York Times logo is in the picture so often, it should have gotten a screen credit, okay? And it's all the usual reporter tropes. You haven't got the story. Go back and get the story. I've got, the top editor saying it. Here's the editor. Here's Dean Baquet, all totally in control as they show him the story. This is the first cut, whatever it is.
Rose is still off the record, but she has given us permission to write about her settlement. We're just trying to figure out a way to confirm it. Harvey offered her $1 million recently for her silence.
And?
Rose refused, but she doesn't want us to quote her.
There's still no on-the-record sources. NDAs are a problem.
Laura Madden didn't sign one. She's the only ex-assistant who is technically free to speak. Ashley and Gwyneth didn't sign one either, but they're not ready to go on the record.
But Laura Madden has to deal with something very different right now.
She has breast cancer. She has to go into surgery, so it's not likely.
I'm still leaving messages for Rowena Chu, but there's no engagement.
So no more proven settlements?
Amber Batilana Gutierrez almost certainly settled, and John Schmidt confirmed that Miramax settled with the woman I visited in Queens.
Anything more on the article from The New Yorker?
No.
So Brower is great. He plays Dean Baquet as if he's this dignified king of the world. I hope Andre Brower will one day play me. I mean, he's so good at it. The New York Times has always been a liberal newspaper, but it wasn't always a crappy third-rate newspaper, which is what it is now, and it has never been as crappy as it has been under the crappy leadership of Dean Baquet. And that's why one of the reasons I call this a lie by context. Under Baquet, sexual assault charges against women were covered in an entirely political way. I've talked about this a million times. It's worth saying again. Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh was accused of a teenage assault by Christine Blasey Ford, an obvious political ploy to derail his appointment. It was only pulled out after it was clear that he was going to pass. And there was literally, as Molly Hemingway points out in her book, there was literally no evidence that Ford and Kavanaugh had ever met, okay? Nonetheless, I went through the New York Times preparing this, and I could not find a single editorial or opinion piece defending Kavanaugh. In fact, it was the same. Every article was the same. Constant calls for Kavanaugh to step down. Even when Kavanaugh lost his temper at being unfairly accused of sexual assault, they said, oh, he's gotten angry. He doesn't have a judicial temperament, so he should step down. The ugliest piece under Dean Baquet, it was such an ugly piece of attack journalism, was, as a rape survivor, I was shaking in my chair as Christine Blasey Ford testified. The idea being all of these people hadn't been listened to, and now Christine Blasey Ford were being listened to. Who cares if you were shaking in your chair? What the hell does that mean? How come there was no article saying Andrew Klavan was shaking in my chair as Brett Kavanaugh was falsely accused? I've been falsely accused. I was shaking in my chair. Who cares if you're shaking in your chair? A man was being accused of something. They had a responsibility to cover it honestly. Now, if the New York Times covered all unsupported charges against men in the same way, then at least we'd say they're creepy, stupid, incompetent, but at least we know where they stand. But when Joe Biden was running for president, it was still the primaries, I believe, Tara Reid, who worked on Biden's staff in the 90s, said that in 1993, Biden had pushed her against the wall, kissed her, put his hand under her skirt, penetrated her with his fingers, and asked, do you want to go somewhere else? 20 days of silence, and then on Easter Sunday, they buried a thing in the paper saying, oh, we don't think it ever happened. Okay. Heroic Dean Baquet, played by Andre Brower, who all of us really should be played, men, women, everybody, should be played by Andre Brower if we want to look dignified and heroic, okay? Dean Baquet, they run an interview with him in the Times explaining why he didn't cover the story, because it's still MeToo time, so you're supposed to be covering everybody, and they didn't. Listen to what he says. This is a quote from the story. I thought that what the New York Times could offer and should try to offer was the reporting to help people understand what to make of a fairly serious allegation against a guy who had been a vice president of the United States and was knocking on the door of being his party's nominee. Look, I get the argument, just do a short, straightforward news story, but I'm not sure that doing this sort of straightforward news story would have helped the reader understand, have all the information he or she needs to think about what we make of this thing. How come they didn't do a story saying I was shaking in my chair when Tara Reid did this? I was shaking in my chair. I was saying, oh my goodness, this is so terrible. Where were the chair shakings? Well, suddenly he has to help people understand. Did he help people understand Brett Kavanaugh? No, he convicted the guy in the press. This movie that hagiographizes the New York Times is a lie by context. Now, the interviewer asks him, he says, I've been looking at the Times coverage of Brett Kavanaugh, and I want to focus on Julie Swetnick. She's the one who made these outlandish claims that there were gang rapes that Kavanaugh was standing on line for and all this stuff. And then her whole story fell apart. He says, the Times wrote the Swetnick story the same day she made the allegation. Why was Kavanaugh treated differently? Dean Beckett, played by Andrew Brower, Kavanaugh was already in a public forum in a large way. Joe Biden was running for president. He says Kavanaugh's status as a Supreme Court justice was in question because of a very serious allegation. He says, when I say in a public way, I don't mean the public way of Tara Reade's. If you ask the average person in America, they didn't know about the Tara Reade case. I wonder why. Why didn't the average person know about it? Oh, yeah, because they didn't cover it. The guy is so dishonest in this interview. It really is corruption. It is not just lies. It's corruption. And one more thing I got to say about this film, because it really did drive me crazy, because they're so talented and they do such a good job. That's why. And because I respect the women who did the actual reporting. The movie goes all out to feminize these characters. That is to point out the things about them that are specifically womanly. Some of them get breast cancer. They have postpartum depression. They miss their children. The reporters giggle when they show up wearing the same dresses. Ooh, like the reporting twins, they say. Their men need female attention and their children need their attention. All of these things. They get assaulted by men. A man comes up to them and bothers them in a bar. If it had been William Thomas, the swimmer who calls himself whatever he could, Leah Thomas, they wouldn't have done that because he's 6'2" and a muscle man. He could take them down, but they felt fine. So all they're saying throughout this whole movie is women are not men. Women have special problems. Is that really the attitude of the New York Times? Will the New York Times come out and say women are not men, even when they dress up like women, even when they have their bodies operated on, that men cannot become women because women have special problems? No. They lie constantly about this until they needed to manipulate you politically in a movie like this. The question I have, I guess, for us is, why are we so bad at this? How long have they've been trying to make the Ronald Reagan story? How long have they been trying to make Witness about Alger Hiss, that Nixon was right about and we were right about, the right was right about? How long have they been doing this? How come there's no story about Hillary Clinton's corruption, but Nixon, George W. Bush, all these guys get taken down? It's all a lie by context because they own the context, and that's on us. That really is on us. They own the media, and they're good at lying, and they're good at creating a context in which their lies seem like the truth. This is why we got to really work at taking back the culture. This is why the Daily Wire is important, but there should be 100 Daily Wires out there. We should all be trying to do this so we can create a context and tell the truth. For more Klavan-y goodness, like and subscribe. And don't forget to subscribe to The Andrew Klavan Show wherever you get your podcasts.